You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
You know, there's a part of Tennessee that I like best, and that is the 1st District. But from that 1st District hails a wonderful doctor, and he also happens to be a member of Congress, and his name is Dr. Phil Rowe. Dr. Phil Rowe, it's a pleasure to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's great. I have to say you guys have had a tough couple weeks there with this the negotiations with the sequestration, and of course now you guys are working on the continuing resolution, or the possibility of, you know, it'd be amazing if we actually had a budget that went from, you know, point A to point B and it consisted of an entire year. That would be nice.
Well, it would be nice because it's never happened since I've been a congressman. Now, it'd be something unique in my time, and I've been here. This is my 5th year, my 3rd term in Congress. I've been here 4 full years, and we haven't had a budget, which I found absolutely astonishing. I helped run a medical practice for over 30 years, and we had a budget every year. We have a fairly large practice, 100 doctors, 450 employees. You have to have a budget. I was while I practiced medicine, I was also mayor of Johnson City, Tennessee, which is 60,000 people. We had a $200 million budget. We had one every year. We balanced it. We didn't raise taxes. We had a surplus every year, even in down years we did. So I know how to do that, and I came to the twilight zone up here and found out you can run the largest economy in the world with no budget, which was news to me.
The president met with some members of the GOP yesterday for, I believe it was dinner, and they had hopefully some, you know, interesting conversations. And certainly I have to, regardless of whether he's actually, you know, being sincere about these negotiations, but I have to commend the president for extending the arm out to members of the GOP. And I hope that this sincerely is an effort for both sides to come together and deal with some of these issues that really, I mean, at some point we have to address them. We can't keep playing the political game. I mean, I don't feel that I'm right, but I hope so.
Now, Brad, you're absolutely right. Here's what I find amazing to me is that was news. That it would be news that the Republicans and the president would have actually met 5 years into his presidency, or going on 5 years into his presidency. Why would that be news? We should have been doing that from day one. And I hope he's sincere. I certainly know that our side is sincere in trying to do this. We have 2 great philosophical differences about what direction we go. Our side of the aisle thinks that we spend too much money, and if you'll look at the data, the CBO believes that this coming year, or the Office of Management Budget, I believe, not the CBO, but the OMB believes that this will be the largest amount of taxes ever collected in the history of this nation. So it is a spending problem. And if we have time today, Brett, we can go by why we've made some cuts on the House side that can show it can be done, and it can be done. And we this year, yesterday, had a vote on a Workforce Investment Act, the WIA Act it's called. It's a federal job training program. And you wouldn't believe the number of, well, there are 35 of these programs that are duplicative, have never been looked at, that we're trying to get consolidated so they make sense for the people out there trying to find a job. And let me just give you an example of 3 of them. I could read all 35 of them, but I won't bore you with that. But one of them is reintegration of ex-offenders, grants to states for workplace and community transition training for incarcerated individuals, Second Chance Act Prisoner Reentry Initiative. Don't those all 3 sound like they're exactly the same thing? Well, you've got 3 different programs with 3 different funding streams, with 3 different directors, with 3 different bureaucracies, and I could go on and on and on. That's how this government has gotten over the years, and it's time somebody sat down and said, we cannot afford to do this any longer. And this little workforce thing, if it were working, it would be one thing, but it's not even working.
Well, let me tack on a little evidence there, Congressman. I spent some time with, I won't mention names, I spent some time with the Vice President of Enrollment Services for North Carolina's community college system just a couple of weeks ago. And it was roughly 74,000 people. And we were actually at a function that we had executives from Siemens who put extensive research in there. Now, mind you, This did not require Congress. This did not require an act of the president. It didn't require any help from Washington other than just getting out of the way, for these folks to come together and realize that we're going to rebuild an old plant in North Carolina, which has been typically a very or I should say work-friendly, job-creating friendly state, and we're going to refurbish an old plant. We're going to need 700,000 to 800,000 jobs just in the first year after opening. We need to train that labor force. Therefore, we're going to get together with the community college, who, as you point out, they will handle that requirement to create a workforce that can handle it and repurpose and re-educate an existing workforce. And all of this was done successfully, and it's grown exponentially now into other programs involving other companies. And somehow it was done without the help of all your friends across the aisle.
Yeah, John, listen to this. This is what I find. This is the Department of Labor. This is not Phil Rowe from East Tennessee speaking. This is the Department of Labor statistics. 3.6 million jobs are unfilled, with 12 million unemployed workers in this country. And we have a jobs training program that should have filled all of those by now if it worked. It's clearly not. And I think the community college, I know we have in Tennessee, we have a community college system and a Tennessee Technology Center. And we have those technology centers within 1 hour of every resident that lives in our state. When you finish, it's a certificate type of thing. Well, it may be a nursing certificate, or a clinical assistant, welder, that kind of thing. Today, even in today's job market, 90% of those people that finish that technical center get a job going out the door.
Well, absolutely. And as a job creator, I could tell you how critical it is and how difficult it is sometimes to find talent. You could find 100 people to interview, but to find somebody who could do sometimes basic jobs is not always easy. We had a friend of yours on yesterday, Congressman Brown, and, he has his 4-way litmus test, right, for any legislation. Is it moral, constitutional, necessary, and affordable? And I tell you, when I look at all of these unnecessary programs, or let's say maybe you or I deem them unnecessary, but shouldn't we really have a litmus test built into any of these programs that basically rates them? And if they're failing, and just like you would write in a contract, you have a certain number of days to heal a wrong that's brought to the attention of the other party, and if you don't, then you could take action on it. In this case, these organizations, if they're not successful, they have to go bye-bye.
Listen, I think Reagan said that the thing that a government program was the hardest thing to die in the world. And if you look at refugee and entrant assistance, targeted assistance grants, refugee and entrant assistance, social services, refugee and entrant assistance, targeted assistance. I mean, on and on and on. And they haven't even been evaluated to see if they even work. That's what's unbelievable. You would never do this in your private business because you wouldn't have a business. You'd go out of business if you did that. But these just keep getting funded year after year after year, and usually increase funding. So I think it's time people like myself, the guys that'll peel the onion back and look at under every rock. It's hard work, but we need to do that, and it's hard to get it. Yesterday during the vote, let me just tell you what happened. Every single Democrat got up and walked out of the room and didn't even vote on this.
That's mature.
That's what I thought. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, well, this is going to be easy now. I thought we were here to have a debate, to listen to people. I all got up and walked out of the room and didn't even vote on this bill. So,
well, you got to digest your lunch.
But I was a little. I remember sitting there all night going over a health care bill, debating it that I knew I was going to lose, but I did.
Are you sure they didn't go listen to Rand Paul?
Well, but that was a pretty 13 hours. I'm impressed.
That was great.
Well, at the end of the day, even if you know you're fighting a losing battle, you owe it to your constituencies to fight fair, but to fight hard. But also, don't you owe it to history to put on record when something is considered by the opposition? And quite frankly, the Democrats owe it to their constituencies in the history to do the same thing. They think that one party is doing wrong, and you have it on record. Then when history can go back and look at something that ended up being poor legislation or poorly implemented, at least you have a history of saying, well, here's why it was deemed wrong. instead of what really seems to happen in Congress, which is, well, forget about it. It's now a permanent, as you said, to Reagan's point, you can't kill it. Just keep throwing more money at it and feed the beast with more money.
You know, Brett, one of the things that helped me the most when I came here was we had a meeting one morning with Judge Scalia, Supreme Court Justice Scalia. I'll never forget what he said. He said, and this is when we had 178 of us. The health care bill was being debated. I was very frustrated by the direction it was going. He said, your job when you're in the minority is to give the other side, give the other opinion, give the other side. He said, I write the minority opinion many times so that history, as you pointed out, history will look back, because sometimes what was debated as the minority opinion going forward will become the majority opinion. And so I've taken that upon myself. If I have which I know I'm going to lose the vote, I know I'm going to. It's incumbent on me to not only talk about it, but to write about it and to make it part of the record so that people know there is another opinion, there is another way to do it. And you're absolutely right. That is my job. You're not going to win every vote, and you're going to lose some and you're going to win some. But the people have a right to deserve to hear both sides of it.
That's an excellent point. I wanted to ask you a question as far as when you're drafting a bill. I know the CBO has to score it, but what are the rules in terms of introducing a bill as far as the cost involved? Are you allowed to add to the budget, or does it have to balance? What are there restrictions?
Yes, so our listeners can sort of figure it out. It's a little the CBO is. They look at a lot of variables, including the humidity in the air, the best I can figure. I don't know how they come up with these calculations, but basically, if I have an idea out there, let's say I'm going to bring a bill forward, and the CBO looks at it and says this will cost, let's say, $1 billion over the next 10 years. Then I have to go in the budget and find $1 billion worth of savings somewhere else. It has to be budget neutral, or that's one of the requirements we have for any legislation that comes up, so that we do not add to the deficit.
Okay, and that's what I was led to understand. So I'm trying to figure out actually how we keep adding $1 trillion a year to our deficit, if that's the case, and it seems
here's how it is.
Somewhere along the line, it's going wrong.
And you're correct. What's happened is, so that everybody understands, there are two parts to our budget. One is mandatory spending, and the other is discretionary spending. Mandatory spending is what's already current law, and current law would be today, on this day in March, 10,000 people turned Medicare age. They right now have access to Medicare. So many thousands turned Social Security age today. That's an obligation under the law to pay those bills. Food stamps, interest on the national debt, Medicaid, other mandatory programs, that's current law. And that will grow based on growth of the population. The services that have been mandated by law to be provided have to be paid for. Discretionary spending, so that folks understand, discretionary is the Department of Defense, that's the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, that's our defense, and other discretionary spending, which is the Department of Education, Commerce, Energy, Homeland Security, FBI, national parks, and so on. If you completely did away with those things I just mentioned in discretionary spending, we still have a budget deficit. That's why the conversation has to be about all of the budget, not just the discretionary part. The discretionary parts where the $85 billion that you see talked about, the cuts are occurring. And let me share just a little bit of frustration with you guys now. I became so angry last week, and you probably have heard me rant about this, when the Homeland Security Secretary, Janet Napolitano, said, we're going to have to turn people loose because of this 5% budget cut we've got. That is, I can't use the words that I used on the radio. It's utter nonsense. If my sheriffs in my local counties where I am, and police chiefs, their county commissions and city mayors came to them and said, chiefs and sheriffs, we have to cut 5% from the budget, they're not going to walk down to the jail, open the door up, and let criminals out. That's not the first thing they're going to do. And that was a scare tactic. It was as wrong as anything I've heard since I've been here, to tell people we have to turn you loose because of this cut. Let me tell you why I know it's bunk. A year and a half ago, John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, said, you congressmen, now the senators didn't do this, you House members, you're going to cut 5% from your budget. And we did. The following year, he said, that was so good, we're going to do it again. We're going to cut 6.4% out of your budget. So that's 11% that we cut in the 112th Congress. The sequester caused another 8.4%, I think is the final number we got. So we're looking at about a 20% cut, 20% less money in the House than I had the day I walked in here in January of 2009. Guess what? My office is still running. Services are still being provided to our constituents. So when she pulled that little stunt, I said, that's all that was, and I think she should be fired.
I certainly agree with you on that statement. In fact, I would look at some of the other agency heads as well. It's just equally frustrating to me when I see some of the people who are heading up some of these very important, especially some of the nominations, whether it be Brennan right now and Chuck Hagel and John Kerry and Susan Rice and what we've seen in energy and agriculture. And it seems to me that there are too many people who have these political agendas instead of, I understand there's differences from one aisle to the other, but there's such a thing as doing what's right and what's principled by, American standards. Not, there has to be some reasonableness.
I totally agree with you, and I look, the president has it's his prerogative to pick who he wants for his cabinet members. I mean, that's his call. He won the election. He can do that.
Right.
It's up to the Senate to advise and consent on those nominations, and sometimes it creates, as it did in Brennan's, a filibuster on Senator Paul's part. And he was making a point, and a good point. I think he made a very, very good constitutional point. If you followed what he said about drone strikes in this country on American citizens, I don't know what holder. He must have been in Colorado or something when he wrote that letter where they've legalized marijuana, because you can't for the life of you can't execute an American citizen in this country without due process, for goodness sakes.
Congressman, one of the things that I want to go back to, because I find it almost insane when you think about the whole purpose of the Constitution was to simply define what the federal government is responsible for, and everything else by default goes back to the state. So the fact
or to you as a citizen.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. The fact that the Department of Defense would not be considered part of the mandatory budget, the fact that it's something that's a fuzzy gray area that can ebb and flow with the political winds, to me is lunacy, because again, the Constitution actually mandates that versus the vast majority of what Congress does, and B, without it, nothing else matters. If we can't defend ourselves, everything else we pontificate is irrelevant.
Well, no, listen, it is. You're correct. That's the one thing that's absolutely pointed out in the Constitution. One of the things that we did this week is that we passed a continuing resolution over to the Senate, and they agreed to the number. We took the number that we had held hard and fast on for 2 years of $1.043 trillion and subtracted from it and got the 984 number. They've agreed to that number. And it's how you spend that money. And what we tried to do with the Department of Defense is to allow the people in the Department of Defense to decide how they would spend their money, whether they spend it on training or put off some weapons systems, or however they want to do it to make the cuts. And the next 2 to 3 weeks will give, or 2 weeks I guess it is now, we'll have a chance to, 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have a chance to debate that. That's over in the Senate now, and it's up to them. The ball's in their court. And it was a pretty good bipartisan vote yesterday, I thought.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wanted to, by the way, mention to the statement before as the president has the right to choose people for his own cabinet. And I certainly agree with that, and I think that should be honored. But I also think that the president should be nominating people who are qualified for the position as well.
Well, that's an outrageous statement.
And one last point that I think would be interesting to if there was a possible change. And when you look at defense, if there was a portion of defense, like the things that really have to be there, should be moved into the non-discretion part of the budget. And then, of course, there are things in defense. There should be 2 parts of defense is what I'm saying, non-discretion and discretional part, especially when you look at the Constitution. I mean, it's like it's the most important part.
It is. I think it almost is. If you look at, and I think the founding fathers never. Although, if you go back to our history, we've had at the outbreak of the Mexican-American War in 1846, I believe, we only had a 7,000-man army. That's all we had. So we had to raise an army at that point. So we had a very small standing army at that point. And so I think we have over the years done basically that, feel like that it is mandatory, and I think both sides of y'all would agree with that. It's just the extent of it, how big we need the military. Those are folks in those positions that have to tell us. And me personally, and this is just me speaking, I'd rather have the biggest stick I've got. So I hope I never need it. You plan in the military for a train wreck and hope you go on a train ride.
I was just about to say that Reagan was right, strength. But I'll leave our conversation with this. If I'm fearful that the president has been on this march towards getting rid of our nuclear program, and I feel like that we should not only be increasing it, but we should be building new more modern weapons and getting rid of course, the much older ones, because we have to maintain that advantage, or we can't match up against countries that have 1 billion more people than we do.
I think we ought to use every weapon in our arsenal, have the most modern weaponry in the world to defend the American people. If it's nuclear, if it's tactical, whatever it is, we need to be sure. And again, if I'm the president, I want the biggest stick you can get, and hope I never have to take it out.
Yep.
I hope never unsheath my knife.
No, we hope they never get used again, of course. But I think strength keeps it from happening, though. When you get too weak, people take advantage of you. We see it in the Middle East, and we see it in Asia right now.
Happens on the football field all the time.
That's true. Congressman,
spoken like a real man from Tennessee.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend.
You too, Congressman. That's Congressman Phil Rowe from the great state of Tennessee, 1st District. You could find him at roe.house.gov. Great to have you. Take care.